I had somebody reach out to me via my website recently after having seen one of my YouTube videos, and it brought up something really interesting that I wanted to share and speak to. So this person basically shared a link to a video, I mean, it doesn't really matter what the channel was or who it was specifically that was speaking, but the content of the video was around, after listening to it, and I love stuff that challenges, honestly, like comments and even messages that kind of challenge what's being shared here, because every one of those, and I would just encourage this in your own life, in your own experience. Every time anything is challenged, it's an opportunity to bring whatever it was that was said or shared, the statement or the behavior that challenged something in you. It's an opportunity to bring it inside of yourself and investigate something in your own experience for yourself, versus taking somebody else's word for something or allowing yourself to get thrown off balance because of an outside opinion. And so I actually really love, the few comments that I've gotten that have been challenging, and this particular message, and even the video that was shared. I went and, watched through the video because it felt like, okay, this is something that's being shared, so this is what's here. So let's see, and be open and take it inside and investigate it in my own experience. There's no outside resource for anything anymore. But what it was that was shared in this video was some people speaking to, I guess what you would term Neo-Advaita. And I honestly, I am not familiar with Advaita, Neo-Advaita, I don't really ascribe to any traditions per se, and so I don't, honestly can't really speak to what that tradition shares or anything like that, but at least the context of this conversation was the way that Neo-Advaita has been kind of, I guess, taken on in the West, and it seemed like what was shared was somebody's experience of kind of following a path of believing or taking somebody else's word for there not being a self, there not being a person, and then following that and getting to a really dark place and essentially getting scared and freaked out, and just how that unfolded, how it unfolded to believe, or to kind of take something like that inside of yourself, that there is no person, and to kind of establish a new belief system around that, and how harmful that can be. And it brought up something interesting, and the conversation between these two in the video was really interesting. And but the context of the message was, maybe you'll find this helpful, or kind of an implication or implying that saying that there's no self or no person is nonsense and is confusion, which is funny, because there was an aspect of this whole process for me where that was a new belief system, where I kind of came across some things that kind of reinforced an experience that I had of there not being a self or a sense of a center inside, and ended up kind of gloving onto that as a new identity, that an identity as a no person. It's just a new identity, and it seems like perhaps that is part of a process. But what I want to speak to in this video is, it seemed like in that conversation, just feeling into it, taking it inside myself, and just kind of like really holding it up next to my own personal experience as what seemed to me like was being shared was a stage of this process where the separate egoic identity is seen through and things start to get so far out there, and it starts to feel fucking terrifying, because there's this sense of, I will never be able to relate to people anymore. I'm gonna get so far out there that, I can't, when I interact with people, I can't connect anymore. And so there is this part of this process where there's kind of there's a sense of aloneness. That's the aloneness that I've been speaking to in a lot of my videos. And the sense that I got, and again, I can't say this for sure because I don't know the direct experiences of the individuals who were speaking in this video, but it was, a pretty prominent channel. But it seemed like what was being spoken was an ego reaching a point where it realized what was going to have to be given up in order to continue into the territory of really and truly losing a sense of center, of losing a sense of self, and getting terrified. And so kind of backpedaling and turning around. So like reaching that point of no return where it realizes what this is really actually about, what the spiritual road is really leading to when it's followed to its end, and getting freaked out and turning around because it's like, oh no, that is not what I signed up for. No way in hell. And that's a very distinct point in this process. And I remember reaching that point and being like, holy shit, this is not what I signed up for. I don't know if I want to do this, but there was just something inside, some quiet voice that just said, like, just stick with it, stick with it, stick with it. And so there's that sense of aloneness. And like when I speak to aloneness, it's like, it feels really dark and isolating. And it's initially may have a quality of loneliness to it, of like a deep loneliness. But what I found here is that like dying into that sense of aloneness and that feeling of just like being so far out that nobody can touch you is like there's a way that leaning into that actually opens into a sense of like intimacy with everything, with the nature of like self, which is different than ego, the nature of reality, the nature of the dual realm of form, like an intimacy with it in like a whole new way that's not identified, and yet feels different. And there was a point in this when there was just like, oh fuck, what have I done? And this sense of like kind of a backpedaling, like a wanting to backpedal. And that was at least the sense that I got from this sharing. And, what something else that came up that I found interesting was that what it felt like is, identity, like, it's gonna do whatever the fuck it has to do to maintain control, to maintain a presence, to maintain itself. And it's gonna come up with all sorts of stories and like terrifying. There's gonna be like terror that comes up and like, oh shit, no, I can't go there. That's warped. That's nonsense. That's dangerous. And I think that really speaks to like this process is not, I would not recommend this for most people. I don't know that if I could choose, I don't know that I would even have chosen it. Like I wouldn't, knowing what it actually, where it actually goes and what it's actually leading to. And all that to say, you know, I spoke in my last video about how there's an intimacy that opens in this. And it may, some of the words that are shared, you know, there's phrases like there is no person, who is it who's doing anything, the person dissolves, and I know that's very commonly communicated and, you know, in modern non-duality. But there's a way that an ego and an identity can glove onto that, and I did that. That happened for a while here. Maybe that's part of the process for others, I don't know. But that definitely happened for a while here. And there was kind of a point that was reached of terror and just like a, ooh, okay, this is where this goes. This is getting really far out there. There is deep aloneness here. And really just having an opportunity to lean into that further. And that can be run from, and many probably do. Many probably do. And then go on to perhaps, I don't know for certain again, but go on to make videos, you know, warning people about the dangers of believing in Neo-Advaita and attaching to the idea of no person. And there is, like, I agree with that, you know, there is a way that can be attached to. And I think probably also for individuals who have had, like myself and probably a lot of others who have had deep trauma in life, where that's very alluring to transcend the person and to transcend the suffering. But then that suffering has to be made friends with. And so there's this dropping down into humanness and an intimacy with all of that really opens when that aloneness is leaned into, and when the identification with the non-doer, with the no person, is let go, because even that's another way that an identity can attach to a concept of what awakening is. But that's, every concept has to be dropped. Everything has to be put down. Even non-duality has to be put down. Bless me. Excuse me. Even non-duality has to be put down. Awakening has to be put down. Enlightenment has to be put down. Transcendence has to be put down. Unity has to be put down. Love has to be put down. God has to be put down. Every concept has to be set down, laid down. And that's terrifying. And I can see how it would lead to warnings like that, you know? And I think too, there's no like judgment of this, you know, because I look back at some of the videos that Henry and I had recorded early on, and it's so obvious, and I can only say in retrospect that, like, oh yeah, that was totally being spoken about from a place of just like having a conceptual understanding and being attached to non-attachment and being attached to not being a self and having a concept of no identity. But when that opens, when that really opens, that's the terror that this conversation was mentioning, and the danger, and the, there's a big fear and an existential terror that opens up, and it's terrifying because that is the moment of like no return, and you can either lean into it and dive off the cliff, or go back, turn around and try to put an identity back together. And there's lots of videos out there, and who knows, maybe I'll look back at my channel, even these videos that I'm putting out now, and be like, wow, that was really misguided. And I'm very open to that, you know. I acknowledge that that's a possibility, and I really try in my videos not to come across as like having everything figured out or being like an awake person, because like the idea of awake has to be put down. The idea of like becoming anything has to all be put down. But it's interesting that there do seem to be a lot of videos where identities and egos are talking about and sharing about what it means to not be an identity or an ego. And I have to acknowledge that that's what was happening here for a while. And there's still subtle ways that identity is hanging on, don't get me wrong. There's little bits of identity here. But it's identities and like a sense of a self talking about how it's ridiculous that not having a self doesn't exist. You know, that it's not possible to not have a self. But how can that be known by a self that thinks, you know, how can that be known by a self? It's only when a self falls away that experience can be shared. You know, it's like, how can you can study the moon and all the things about it, but if you've never seen the moon, if you've never experienced the moon, you know, it's, how can you really speak about it? Can you really share about it? So it's this interesting thing that it seems that ego and self are different, and there have been kind of like a flashing, or like a light flashing on and off of like a self disappearing here, but it's very like day to day still present, still functioning, and maybe it won't ever fall away. That's okay. But so self and ego are different, and they're spoken about in a similar way. And yeah, it seems an ego or an identity to maintain itself, if it gets scared and sees that a path is going to lead to its disappearance, it's going to do whatever it can to regain control, even if it means going out and making videos about how dangerous it is to follow a path where there's not a sense of identity anymore, where the identity falls away. And that's not to negate, you know, the potential dangers of messages that are very radical, of like, there's no person, there's no self, there's no person, there's no self, because that does give egos and identities something new to attach to. But it's no different than attaching to anything else, you know? Like attaching to anything, it's all the same. It's all exactly the same. Attaching to no self, attaching to non-duality is no different than attaching to a religion, or attaching to a diet, or attaching to a lifestyle, or attaching to money or material things. It's all the same thing. It's all the same. So yeah, that brought up something interesting. But I guess all this to say is that where this goes is not being reliant on anything external. It's like everything is taken inside and held up next to direct experience. And it's like there's been this point reached in me where it's like, I don't care anymore what anything else says. Like I share from direct experience, and I'm not sharing to help anybody. It's like this speaking is a big part of this process here. It's a big part of this authenticity, because there was such deep suppression that the use of this voice, finding this voice, has been a huge part of this process. Singing has been a huge part of this process. Finding an authentic expression, an unhindered expression of this voice has been huge. And that's what this platform is for me, you know. And if others get some solace out of it, or some sense of not feeling alone, like, that's wonderful. But everything has to be taken inside of you and checked in with, like, does this align with the direct experience here? And being open enough that being able to be open enough to admit that you might be wrong, and being able to be humble, and admitting like, oh yeah, it does feel like there's something here that's being hidden or being subtly clung to. And I reached so many of those points where I've had to really acknowledge inside myself the ways that there was still attachment and clinging and things that were being avoided and things that were being clung to because something else was being avoided. And so many ways, this is like, it takes such deep truth, like radical truth inside oneself, to discover the truth of being, the simplicity of the truth of being. So it was just something that came up. I don't know if there was a point to any of that. Just check in with your direct experience. Don't be seeking outside for something to believe in. There's nothing out there. You have to become your own resource. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.